Do you live in Ecuador? Do you live in the provinces of Morona Santiago, Chimborazo, Bolívar, Guayas, or anywhere across the broader Andean region of South America? If the answer is yes, you need to watch this full video, because what is developing right now on one of the most active and most dangerous volcanoes on the planet deserves your complete and undivided attention. This is not a story that ended yesterday. This is not a story that scientists are looking back on from a safe distance. This is happening right now, and the numbers being recorded in the past week are not normal. Not even for a volcano that has been erupting almost continuously since 1934. The volcano is called Sangay. It sits deep in southern Ecuador, inside the province of Morona Santiago, roughly 30 kilometers from the city of Macas. It rises to 5,230 meters above sea level, that is 17,159 feet. A towering glacier-capped stratovolcano that dominates the jungle horizon on clear days and glows like a burning coal against the night sky when the activity surges. And right now, the activity is surging. On a single day in the late May 2026, Ecuador's own Instituto Geofísico-Escuela Politécnica Nacional, the nation's official monitoring agency, known as the IG-EPN, recorded 356 seismically detected explosions in a 24-hour period at Sangay. 356. That is one explosion roughly every 4 minutes, not once in an hour. Not a small tremor. 356 individual explosive events, each one registered by the seismic network, each one sending ash and gas punching skyward from the summit crater. But here is the problem. Most people hearing that number think it sounds dramatic but contained. They picture a volcano doing what volcanoes do, far away on a remote mountain that nobody lives near. They do not picture what actually happens to the communities downwind. They do not picture the ash that settles on crops, on water sources, on the rooftops of homes in Riobamba, in Guamote, in Alausi, in Macas. They do not picture the lahars, the volcanic mudflows, churning down the river valleys, carrying boulders and trees and debris into streams that thousands of people depend on for drinking water. That is the part of this story that matters, and it is the part that is unfolding right now. Sangay has been in an active eruptive phase since March 2019. That is more than 7 years of near-continuous eruption. In that entire stretch, scientists and officials have maintained the observatory alert level at yellow, level 2 on a 4-level scale. Yellow means ongoing eruption with hazards, but not an imminent catastrophic event. But within that yellow status, the daily reality has varied enormously. There have been quieter stretches where explosion counts dropped to 65 or 70 per day. And there have been surges, like the one right now, like the one in late April 2026 when 471 explosions were recorded in a single day, or April 29th when 378 explosions were logged with ash plumes reaching 1,800 meters above the vent and incandescent rockfalls cascading 1,400 meters down the volcano's flanks. The current burst of activity is not an isolated spike. It is part of a pattern that has been intensifying through the spring of 2026, and right now the mountain is refusing to calm down. And now it gets worse. When Sangay explodes, it is not just the sound and the spectacle that create danger. The ash it produces travels. On May 27th and May 28th, 2026, the Volcanic Ash Advisory Center in Washington, the official international agency that monitors airborne volcanic ash for aviation safety, issued formal alerts warning that Sangay's ash plume had reached an estimated 22,000 feet above sea level. That is flight level 220. That is the altitude where commercial aircraft operate. When a volcanic ash plume reaches that elevation, it does not stay above the volcano. It moves. Wind carries it hundreds of kilometers an hour. And fine volcanic ash at that altitude is invisible to the naked eye. It does not show up on standard aircraft radar, and it can destroy jet engines without warning. The VAOC advisories are not precautionary bureaucratic filings. They are emergency warnings issued to pilots and air traffic controllers across the region. In April 2026, a separate VAAC advisory warned of ash reaching 25,000 feet, flight level 250, from Sangay. This volcano is not just a ground-level concern. It is an aerial hazard for one of the most active aviation corridors in South America. This next part matters, because to truly understand what is happening right now, you need to understand what Sangay actually is. This is not a volcano that erupts occasionally and then goes dormant for decades. The Smithsonian Institution's Global Volcanism Program, which tracks every volcano on Earth, describes Sangay as one of the most active volcanoes in Ecuador, and one of the most persistently active in the entire world. The current eruption period that began in March 2019 has never truly stopped. Before that, it was erupting almost continuously from 1728 until 1916. Before that, the first documented eruption was in 1628. This mountain has been exploding, building, and reshaping itself for centuries. And beneath the modern cone, the one you see exploding today, lie the remnants of two older volcanic edifices that were so catastrophically destroyed by collapse that the debris flows reached all the way to the Amazonian lowlands to the east. Most people are missing this. Sangay is technically classified as the southernmost of Ecuador's volcanoes, sitting east of the main Andean crest. That position matters enormously for where the ash goes. The prevailing winds at high altitude across this region typically blow from east to west, or from southeast to northwest, meaning that when Sangay sends a major plume aloft, it drifts toward the heavily populated western provinces, Chimborazo, where Riobamba is located, Bolívar, where the farming communities of Chilanes and Guaranda lie, even Guayas, where Ecuador's largest city, Guayaquil, home to nearly 3 million people, sits on the coastal plain far to the west. During major eruption events, ash from Sangay has reached all of these places, not hypothetically, not in computer models, in real documented events, with real consequences for real families. Here is why this is serious. On September 20th, 2020, Sangay produced what remains one of the most significant eruption events in its modern record. At 4:20 in the morning, before most families were awake, the mountain exploded in a way that had not been seen in recent months. Within 10 minutes, satellite imagery showed a massive ash cloud rising 6 to 10 kilometers above the summit. Some analyses placed the highest parts of the plume at 15 kilometers, nearly 50,000 feet above sea level. The eruption lasted roughly 2 hours. When it was over, 32 districts across the provinces of Chimborazo, Bolívar, Guayas, and Los Rios were buried under ashfall. The Servicio Nacional de Gestión de Riesgos y Emergencias, Ecuador's national emergency management agency, documented the devastation across a huge swath of the country. In Chilanes Canton in Bolívar province alone, 18,785 people were affected. Water sources supplying more than 19 communities were contaminated, leaving residents without access to safe drinking water. Crops across the region were destroyed. Farmers who had worked their entire lives building their farms watched their harvests collapse under a blanket of volcanic ash. In the province of Chimborazo, districts including Guamote, Alausi, Chunchi, Palatanga, and Comanda suffered some of the worst impacts. Roads were choked with ash, visibility dropped to near zero, animals died. Livelihoods vanished overnight. And that was the 2020 eruption. That was a single major burst from a volcano that is, right now, in June 2026, showing explosion rates that rival the worst phases of that same eruptive cycle. What happened next changed everything in how scientists view this volcano. The 2020 event was a turning point, not because Sangay had been quiet before, it had not been, but because it showed in real time how rapidly this mountain can shift from a persistent low-level eruption to a landscape-altering catastrophic event. The transition happened in the dark. It happened while families were sleeping. The warning windows were short. The downstream consequences were immense. And the ash that destroyed those crops in 2020 also affected Ecuador's banana and flour export industries, both of which rely on vast agricultural operations in the lowland provinces, directly in Sangay's ashfall corridor. Ecuador is the world's largest exporter of bananas. When Sangay erupts heavily, the economic shockwaves do not stay in the Andes. They move through supply chains around the world. Now the focus shifts to what is actually happening on the ground in 2026. The 356 explosion day recorded on May 26, 27 did not come out of nowhere. It was the most intense single-day count in a period that had already seen 378 explosions on April 28, 29, 471 explosions on April 29, 30, and a spike reaching 800 meters of ash and gas plume height with incandescent rock falls descending 1,400 meters below the crater on that April surge. The rock falls are significant. Incandescent material rolling 1,400 meters down a volcano's flanks means glowing, molten, or near-molten rock cascading through the jungle and into the river valleys below. When that superheated material meets water, from rain, from snowmelt off the glacier, from the river channels, it generates lahars, volcanic mudflows. And lahars move fast. They do not give warnings. They can travel 50 or 60 kilometers down a river valley, picking up debris, trees, boulders, and anything else in their path, and arrive at communities downstream with almost no time to respond. This is where it becomes dangerous. The rivers draining the flanks of Sangay, particularly the Rio Volcan and the channels leading into the broader drainage network of Morona Santiago province, have a documented history of lahar events during periods of high eruptive activity. In previous eruption cycles, officials in Morona Santiago have specifically warned that rivers near the volcano could be blocked by debris, posing catastrophic flooding risk to communities downstream. A lahar that blocks a river does not just destroy whatever is in the channel. It creates a natural dam. That dam fills. And eventually it fails, setting a catastrophic wall of water and volcanic debris downstream in a matter of minutes. Communities that thought they were safe because they were not directly below the volcano's summit suddenly find themselves facing a flood unlike anything they have experienced. This is not a theoretical risk. It is a well-documented hazard mode for Sangay, and it becomes significantly more dangerous during exactly the kind of intense, sustained eruptive period the mountain is in right now. But that is not the real story. The real story is the persistence. This is not a volcano that erupted dramatically once and is now winding down. The data for 2026 alone shows that from the very beginning of the year through today, Sangay has been producing hundreds of explosions every single day, every single week, without stopping. In January 2026, advisories were already noting ash plumes reaching at 21,000 feet. In February, the daily explosion count was running at 216 to 251 events per day, with SO2 degassing and persistent thermal anomalies. In March, 347 explosions in a day, ash to 700 meters above the vent, crater glow visible at 1:40 in the morning. In April, the peak counts hit 471 in a single day. In May, 356 explosions, ash plumes to 22,000 feet, official VAAC advisories issued over a dozen times in the space of weeks. Advisory number 2026-534 from the Washington VAAC, issued on June 4th, just yesterday, was the 534th such advisory for Sangay in the year 2026 alone. 534 aviation warnings in 5 months. Think about what that number actually means. It means that, on average, more than 3 aviation ash advisories per day have been required for this single volcano so far this year. One more thing you need to know. The eruption that is ongoing at Sangay right now is not happening in isolation across the Pacific Ring of Fire. On the same days that Sangay was recording 356 explosions, the nearby Ecuadorian volcano Reventador, located to the north, was producing 70 of its own explosive events, with ash to 600 meters above its vent and glowing rockfalls of its own. Further north in Central America, Guatemala's Fuego and Santa Maria volcanoes were simultaneously lofting ash plumes to around 1 kilometer above their craters. Mexico's Popocatépetl was emitting ash, gas, and vapor. In Indonesia, multiple volcanic systems were in states of eruption or elevated unrest. The Pacific Ring of Fire, the chain of volcanic and seismic hazard that encircles most of the Pacific Ocean and runs through Ecuador, is not dormant. It is awake, and multiple sections of it are speaking at the same time. And tonight changes the timeline in a very specific way, because historical records for Sangay show something that scientists pay close attention to. The highest monthly average of daily explosions ever recorded at this volcano, 755 per day, occurred during June 2023. Not in January, not during a winter storm season. In June. The year 2023 was the most explosively intense period in Sangay's modern recorded history. The months currently unfolding in 2026 are following a trajectory that bears uncomfortable resemblance to the early build-up phase of that 2023 escalation. In the months leading up to June 2023, daily explosion counts were rising. And then in mid-June 2023, the seismic network began detecting a sharp and sustained increase that pushed daily averages well above 700 events. The Smithsonian's Global Volcanism Program documented plumes rising as high as 5 kilometers above the summit during that period, incandescent material descending 1 kilometer down the flanks every day. If 2026 follows a similar seasonal pattern, then the weeks ahead, the weeks of June and July, are precisely the window where the current elevated activity could intensify further rather than decay. Here is why this is serious, in a way that extends beyond Ecuador's borders. Sangay is not just a local story. In 2 massive prehistoric eruptions, events that geologists estimate occurred tens of thousands of years ago, Sangay sent so much volcanic material into the atmosphere that global average temperatures dropped by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius for several years. The planet cooled. Growing seasons shortened across hemispheres. Civilizations felt the impact of a single mountain in southern Ecuador. Those events are not coming tomorrow. Nobody is saying a prehistoric scale eruption is imminent, but they are part of the geologic identity of this volcano. They are written into the rock record, and they serve as a reminder that what feels like a manageable, ongoing yellow alert eruption today is happening on a mountain that has, in its history, reshaped the global climate. The same volcano that is firing 356 explosions per day right now was capable, in another era, of altering the temperature of the entire Earth. Families living in Macas, the capital of Morona Santiago province, about 30 kilometers from the volcano, have been living with this reality for years. They wake up to days where the sky to the west is clear, and then they check the IG-EPN monitoring page and see that the mountain has produced 200 more explosions overnight. Farmers in the cantons of Alausi and Guamote in Chimborazo province know this cycle. They know that when the wind shifts and the ash plume swings westward, their crops may be covered by morning. A half centimeter of volcanic ash does not sound like much, But half a centimeter distributed across a field of crops is enough to block photosynthesis, to contaminate water sources, to damage the respiratory systems of livestock. And half a centimeter can become 2 centimeters in a single event. Communities in the ashfall zones have learned to keep masks on hand. They have learned to cover water tanks. They have learned to watch the direction of the smoke column rising from the mountain at sunset and make decisions about the next morning based on what they see. Most people are missing this part of the story. The human infrastructure around Sangay's danger zone is not like a major metropolitan area with robust emergency services and instant communication. Morona Santiago province has a population of approximately 192,500 people, spread across a vast, mostly rural territory of 25,790 square kilometers, roughly the size of the state of Vermont. The capital, Macas, is a mid-sized city, but the cantons between the volcano and the western provinces are rural, agricultural, and, in many places, extremely difficult to reach by road during volcanic events. When lahars block river channels and debris covers roads, evacuation routes that exist on paper become impassable in reality. When ash falls overnight, farmers who need to move their cattle to safer ground may not be able to drive their vehicles through ash-covered mountain roads before the window closes. And now, against that backdrop, comes the present moment. June 5th, 2026. The IG-EPN's most recent reports confirm that Sangay's eruption is continuing. The alert level remains at yellow, level 2, but the thermal anomalies being detected by satellite at the summit crater are persistent. That thermal signal means ongoing magmatic activity at the surface. It means the conduit connecting the deep magmatic system to the crater is open and feeding material upward. The explosion counts over the past week have not dropped back to the quieter baseline levels seen in mid-May. They have remained elevated. The VAAC. Washington issued advisory number 534 for this volcano on June 4th, noting conditions at the summit. The mountain is not calming. The geophysical signal is not trending toward quiet. This is where it becomes dangerous in a way that forecasters watch carefully. When a volcano maintains elevated explosion rates for an extended period, week after week of 200, 300, 350, 400 explosions per day, there are 2 possible trajectories. The first is gradual decay, where the system slowly releases pressure and the daily counts begin falling. The second is continued buildup, where the escalating explosive output indicates that the magmatic system is feeding material toward the surface faster than it is being expelled, which can precede a sudden, large, single eruptive event. The September 20th, 2020 eruption followed this second pattern. Activity had been elevated for weeks. And then, at 4:20 in the morning, a single massive explosion sent ash 15 kilometers into the atmosphere and covered 32 districts in volcanic fallout within hours. Scientists cannot predict with certainty which trajectory the current period will follow. What they can say, and what the data clearly shows, is that the mountain is currently behaving in a way that demands active monitoring and preparedness across every province in the Ashfall corridor. One more thing you need to know about the communities directly to the east of Sangay, in the Amazonian lowlands of Morona Santiago. These are communities that do not appear in headlines very often. Some of them are indigenous communities with deep roots in the land around the volcano. They have watched this mountain across generations. They have oral histories that include the eruptions of the 1800s and early 1900s. They remember the lahar events that reshaped their rivers. And right now, in June 2026, they are watching the mountain produce 356 explosions in a day, watching the incandescent rock falls cascade down the flanks at night, visible even from the town of El Puyo on clear evenings, glowing orange and red against the black mountain. And they are doing what communities in volcanic zones have always done, watching, waiting, hoping that this is a period of release rather than a period of escalation. But here is what the data says. In the first 5 months of 2026 alone, the Washington VAAC issued 534 advisory notices for this single volcano. The April 2026 peak of 471 explosions in a day surpassed the March 4th, 2026 count of 347. The late May count of 356 came after a brief mid-May quiet period that lasted only days. The pattern is not one of steady decay. The pattern is one of recurring surges, each separated by relatively short, quiet intervals. In volcanology, that kind of intermittent escalation with recurring peaks is a signal that the magmatic system has not settled into a quieter equilibrium. The pressure is not bleeding off evenly. It is building, releasing, building again. The Volcanic Ash Advisory Center in Washington has now issued over 500 formal advisories for Sangay in 2026. That is advisory number 2026-534 and counting. Each one of those advisories represents a moment when satellite imagery, webcam data, and atmospheric modeling confirmed that volcanic ash had reached altitudes used by commercial aviation and needed to be tracked in real time across the region. 534 times in 5 months. That averages out to more than 3 formal aviation warnings per day, every day, without a single day off, for 155 days straight. Most people who fly through South American airspace, who eat bananas grown in Ecuador, who drink coffee grown in the Andean highlands, have no idea this volcano exists. They have no idea that right now, on this day, a mountain that has been in nearly continuous eruption for 92 years is producing hundreds of explosions before breakfast, sending ash plumes to 22,000 feet, rolling incandescent rockfalls down its glaciated flanks, and threatening the water supplies of hundreds of thousands of people across one of the most agriculturally vital regions of South America. And that is the thing about Sangay. It does not announce itself the way a dramatic single eruption does. It does not make international news every day the way a new volcanic awakening would. It is persistent. It is relentless. It is a mountain that has been doing this since 1628, and it has no apparent intention of stopping. The current eruptive period has now lasted more than 7 years without a genuine pause. 7 years of daily explosions. 7 years of ash plumes. 7 years of lahar risk in the river valleys below. 7 years of communities adapting to the reality of living in the shadow of one of the most active volcanoes on Earth. Right now, in early June 2026, the data from the Instituto Geofísico-Escuela Politécnica Nacional shows that the eruption is continuing. The thermal anomalies at the summit are persisting. The explosion counts remain elevated above the mid-May baseline. The VAAC continues to track the plume. The alert level is yellow, and history, the history of September 20th, 2020, the history of June 2023, the deeper history of what this mountain did in prehistoric time, tells us that a yellow alert at Sangay is not permission to stop watching. The mountain is still talking. Whether it is speaking in the language of a gradual, long-term slow burn or in the language of a sudden escalation, we do not yet know. The seismographs are running. The satellites are watching. The farmers in Guamote and Alosi are checking the wind direction. The families in Macas are sleeping under a sky that may or may not be clear by morning. The rivers draining the volcano's flanks are carrying load. The system is still evolving tonight. The explosion count for today has not yet been finalized. The next VAAC advisory could come at any hour. And what this volcano decides to do in the days and weeks ahead, whether it slowly quiets or whether it follows the seasonal pattern that turned June 2023 into the most explosively intense month in its modern recorded history, is something that no one can answer with certainty right now. What we can say is this: Sangay is awake. It has been awake for years. And right now, in June 2026, it is more awake than it has been in recent months. The mountain is not finished.